A struggling single father takes a simple job, repairing an old barn on a quiet farm. He thinks it's just another paycheck. But what he doesn't know, the woman who hired him owns thousands of acres of land and a past that could change both their lives forever. The barn was barely standing. Rain leaked through the broken roof. Silas wiped sweat from his brow, gripping the worn handle of his hammer. Marigold, calm, mysterious. "You fix things without asking questions, don't you, Mr. Calloway?" Silas smirks, replies, "I don't ask questions when I need the money." But maybe he should have. Silas Calloway took a deep breath, letting the crisp autumn air fill his lungs as he stepped out of the old pickup truck. The small house he had rented at the edge of Hopewell wasn't much, but it was a place to start over. A place where he and his son, Finn, could try to build something resembling a home. Finn, a wiry 7-year-old with boundless energy, jumped down from the truck bed, his sneakers crunching against the gravel driveway. His wide, curious eyes scanned their surroundings before turning to his father with an excited grin. "Dad, do you think there's buried treasure here?" he asked, bouncing on his heels. Silas chuckled, ruffling his son's messy blonde hair. "Maybe not treasure, but I have a feeling we'll find something good in this town." They had arrived in Hopewell only the night before, and though Silas had barely begun unpacking, work was already waiting. A job offer had come through from a woman named Marigold Everhart, the owner of an old farm on the outskirts of town. She needed someone to repair a weathered barn on her property, and Silas, a skilled carpenter by trade, had eagerly accepted. Work was work, and for a man who had spent the last few years drifting from one odd job to another, it was exactly what he needed. As Silas drove down the winding country road leading to the Everhart farm, he couldn't help but admire the scenery. Fields of golden wheat stretched across the horizon, swaying gently under the cool breeze. The trees lining the road were ablaze with autumn colors, painting the landscape in fiery reds and oranges. Hopewell felt different from the places he had passed through before. There was something quiet and steady about it, a kind of stillness that settled deep in the bones. When the Everhart farm came into view, Silas slowed the truck, taking in the sprawling land. The farmhouse was a charming relic from another time, with white wooden panels and a wraparound porch. A few feet away stood the barn he'd been hired to repair. Its red paint was faded, and the roof sagged in places, but the structure itself had good bones. Waiting near the barn was a woman dressed in a flannel shirt, jeans, and sturdy work boots. She stood with her arms crossed, studying the barn with quiet intensity. As Silas climbed out of the truck, the woman turned toward him. She had long chestnut brown hair pulled back into a loose ponytail and a face that was striking, not in an ostentatious way, but in the way that made you want to keep looking. There was a quiet strength in her eyes that carried stories untold. "Silas Calloway?" she asked, her voice even and steady. He nodded, extending a calloused hand. "That's me. You must be Marigold Everhart." She shook his hand firmly. "I appreciate you coming out so soon. The barn's seen better days, but I'd like to keep it standing for a few more years if possible." Silas glanced at the structure. "Shouldn't be a problem. Mind if I take a closer look?" Marigold gestured for him to go ahead, and he stepped inside. The scent of aged wood and hay filled the air as beams of sunlight streamed through the gaps in the roof. He ran his fingers along one of the support beams, tapping it lightly. Solid. A good sign. "The framework is still strong," he said, turning to her. "But the roof needs reinforcing, and some of these boards should be replaced before winter sets in." Marigold nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'll help wherever I can. I'm not much of a carpenter, but I can hold a hammer." Silas smirked. "Not many landowners I've worked for are willing to get their hands dirty. I don't like standing around," she replied simply. That Silas could respect. As they discussed the repair plans, Finn wandered around the property, kicking at the fallen leaves with the enthusiasm only a child could muster. Near the farmhouse, he spotted a small, scruffy dog curled up under the porch steps. "Dad, look!" Finn called out. He crouched down, extending a cautious hand toward the dog. The animal sniffed him hesitantly before its tail wagged in approval. Marigold chuckled. "That's Rusty. He showed up one day and decided to stay. I don't think he belongs to anyone." "Can I keep him?" Finn asked, his eyes shining with hope. Silas hesitated. They were still settling in, and taking on a pet was a big responsibility. But the way Finn clung to the little dog, the way Rusty leaned into his touch as if they had known each other forever, Silas couldn't bring himself to say no. Marigold smiled. "Rusty's been looking for a friend. I think he just found one." Silas glanced at her, seeing something unspoken in her expression, a quiet understanding. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the farm, Silas found himself lingering longer than he intended. There was something about this place, about the way Marigold spoke of it with such devotion, about the way Finn had already made himself at home, that made him pause. He had spent years running, searching for a place where he and Finn could belong. Maybe Hopewell was that place. Maybe this farm, with its weathered barn and its quiet, resolute owner, was the start of something new. Marigold, watching him from the corner of her eye, felt a similar hesitation. She'd been alone for so long, used to keeping people at arm's length. But Silas and Finn carried something with them, a warmth that she hadn't felt in years. As Silas loaded Finn into the truck, Marigold found herself speaking before she could stop. "I make a mean apple pie," she said. "If you're still around this weekend, maybe you and Finn would like to stop by." Silas met her gaze, a slow smile spreading across his face. "We'd like that." As he drove away, Marigold watched the dust settle behind his truck, a strange feeling blooming in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, something had begun to take root. The rhythmic sound of a hammer striking wood echoed through the quiet morning air as Silas Calloway focused on his work. The barn had seen better days, but as he secured a fresh wooden plank against one of the support beams, he could already see the structure beginning to regain its strength. The sun had barely risen above the treetops, but he had started early. Years of carpentry had taught him that morning was the best time to work. The air was cool, the world was still, and he could lose himself in the steady, methodical rhythm of his craft. Somewhere behind him, the crunch of boots on gravel signaled Marigold Everhart's approach. She had made good on her promise to help, though he was still surprised she had insisted. Most landowners he had worked for in the past had preferred to supervise from a distance, offering little more than the occasional comment about his progress. But not Marigold. "Coffee?" she asked, stepping up beside him and holding out a battered thermos. Silas set his hammer down and accepted the cup she poured for him. The rich aroma of black coffee curled into the air between them. He took a sip, nodding his approval. "Strong." Marigold smirked. "I don't do weak coffee." Silas glanced at her, noting the way her sharp green eyes scanned the barn with a mixture of scrutiny and fondness. She wasn't just looking at the structure. She was remembering something. "This place must mean a lot to you," he remarked. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "It's been in my family for generations. My grandfather built this, born with his own hands. My parents kept it running. I spent my childhood here running through these fields, learning how to ride horses before I could even ride a bike." Her voice softened, tinged with something heavier. "But it's different now," she added. "It's just me." Silas didn't push for more. He understood loss. He had lived with it for years. Instead, he took another sip of coffee and returned, his focus to the barn. "Well, lucky for you, this place still has good bones. With a little work, it'll stand for years to come." She gave him a small, appreciative nod. "That's the hope." For the next few hours, they worked side by side. Silas handled most of the heavy lifting, while Marigold assisted where she could, holding beams in place, measuring planks, passing him tools. She wasn't as practiced as he was, but she was willing to learn, and that counted for something. It was rare to find someone willing to put in the work for something they cared about. By mid-morning, Finn arrived with Rusty trotting happily at his heels. The boy had insisted on bringing the dog to the farm, declaring that Rusty was now officially his business partner. Business partner? Marigold asked, amused. Finn nodded seriously. Yep, Dad fixes things and I make sure nobody slacks. Off, Silas chuckled. Guess I better stay on my toes then. Finn's presence brought a lightness to the air. He explored the barn with the same enthusiasm he approached everything, asking endless questions about the tools, the wood, and the structure itself. Will this barn be like new when you're done? Finn asked, tilting his head as he examined the half-repaired wall. Silas considered the question. Not new, but strong. Some things aren't meant to be replaced, just reinforced. Marigold glanced at him at that, as if she understood the meaning behind his words. As they worked, Silas noticed the way Marigold avoided mentioning her family in too much detail. The way her jaw tensed slightly whenever she spoke about the farm's history. Hopewell was a small town. Rumors traveled fast. He had already picked up pieces of the story from casual conversations at the diner. The Everhart family had once been one of the wealthiest landowners in the area. Marigold's father had expanded the business, making smart investments, turning a simple farm into something grand. But after his death, things had changed. The estate had been left to Marigold, but she had no interest in the wealth, the influence, the expectations that came with the Everhart name. She had rejected the idea of selling the land to developers despite pressure from corporate buyers. Instead, she had chosen this life, a quiet existence, tending to the land, keeping the farm running on her own terms. Silas respected that. It wasn't easy to walk away from what the world expected of you. As the afternoon wore on, dark clouds gathered in the distance. The wind picked up, sending leaves skittering across the ground. Marigold looked toward the sky. Looks like we've got a storm coming. Silas nodded. We should wrap up for the day. This old barn won't do well in high winds. Finn groaned. Oh, but we were just getting started. Marigold smiled. The barn will still be here tomorrow, Finn. Reluctantly, the boy gathered his things while Silas secured their work for the night. By the time they were ready to leave, the first drops of rain had begun to fall. As Silas turned toward his truck, Marigold hesitated. Then, in a voice that was almost too quiet to hear over the rising wind, she said, "You and Finn should come by for dinner sometime. It's been a while since this house had company." Silas met her gaze. There was something open and honest in the way she said it. No pretense, no formality, just a simple invitation. "Yeah," he said. "I think we'd like that." Marigold nodded once, then turned toward the farmhouse. Silas watched her go, something stirring in his chest that he couldn't quite name. The storm rolled in, and as he drove home with Finn chattering in the seat beside him, he couldn't shake the feeling that despite the clouds, despite the uncertainty, something about Hopewell felt a little more like home. The rain had not relented overnight. By morning, Hopewell was wrapped in a misty, silver veil, the roads slick with water, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth. Silas Calloway watched the droplets race each other down the fogged-up window of his small rented house, sipping the last of his coffee as Finn chattered excitedly at the kitchen table. "Do you think Rusty likes pancakes?" the boy asked, swinging his legs beneath his chair. Silas arched a brow. "Pretty sure Rusty likes anything he can get his paws on." Finn grinned and crumbled a small piece of his pancake onto the floor. Within seconds, Rusty darted forward, snatching up the morsel with an eager wag of his tail. Silas sighed, but didn't have the heart to reprimand his son. Ever since they had arrived in Hopewell, Finn had been lighter, more at ease. Maybe it was the stability. Or maybe it was the quiet magic of the Everhart farm that had already begun weaving its way into their lives. And maybe it was something or someone else entirely. Silas exhaled slowly, pushing that thought aside. Tonight, he and Finn were having dinner at the Everhart farmhouse, per Marigold's invitation. The thought of sitting around a proper dinner table, sharing a meal that wasn't hastily put together from whatever was in the fridge, sent an odd pang through him. It had been a long time since he'd felt the warmth of a home that wasn't. Just a temporary stop along the way, Finn stuffed another bite of pancake into his mouth before tilting his head. "Do you think Miss Marigold eats pancakes?" Silas smirked. "I imagine she does. Why?" "Because she seems kind of serious," Finn said, scrunching his nose. "Like maybe she only eats important grown-up food." Silas chuckled. "I'll be sure to ask her at dinner." By the time Silas and Finn arrived at the Everhart farm that evening, the storm had passed, leaving the fields fresh and glistening beneath the fading sunlight. The farmhouse, though old, had a kind of quiet grace to it, its porch light casting a warm glow against the deepening blue of the sky. Marigold greeted them at the door, her sleeves rolled up, a streak of flour dusted across her cheek. She looked different, softer maybe, less guarded. "Perfect timing," she said. "Dinner's almost ready." Finn beamed. "Did you make pancakes?" Marigold blinked, then laughed. "Not exactly, but close enough." Inside, the farmhouse was a world of its own, cozy, lived in, filled with the scent of baked bread and something slow-cooked. The walls were lined with old photographs, books stacked haphazardly on shelves, a fire crackling in the stone hearth. It felt like a home. As they settled in, Marigold brought out steaming bowls of beef stew and fresh biscuits, setting them down on the sturdy wooden dining table. Finn took a bite and immediately hummed in approval. "Okay, this is way better than pancakes," Marigold smiled. "Glad to hear it." Silas glanced around, taking in the details of the room. "This place has history," Marigold nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Every corner of it has a story." Finn, ever curious, pointed to an old black and white photo on the mantel. "Who's that?" Marigold followed his gaze, her face shifting slightly. "That's my father, Elijah Everhart." Silas noticed the way her fingers curled slightly around the edge of the table, the way her voice dipped just enough to reveal something unspoken. "He built this farm up," she continued, "turned it into what it is today. He had big dreams for it, for me." There was something weighted in those last words, something unfinished. Silas didn't press. He understood that kind of silence, the kind that held memories too tangled to unravel easily. But Finn, unburdened by the unspoken rules of adults, asked the question directly. "Is he still here?" Marigold hesitated, then shook her head. "No, he passed away a few years ago." "Oh," Finn said softly. "I'm sorry." Marigold gave a small smile. "Thank you, Finn." Silas watched her carefully, recognizing the flicker of loss in her eyes. He knew that feeling, that hollow space where someone should be, and for the first time he wondered just how much Marigold Everhart had lost. After dinner, while Finn played, outside with Rusty, Silas found himself standing on the farmhouse porch beside Marigold, both of them watching as the sky darkened, the stars beginning to peek through. "I appreciate the invitation," Silas said. "It's been a while since we've had a real home-cooked meal." Marigold leaned against the wooden railing, her gaze distant. "I figured it was about time this house had company again." A pause settled between them, not uncomfortable but full of meaning. "You don't talk much about your past," she noted after a moment. Silas exhaled. "Not much to talk about." She turned slightly, studying him. "That's not true." He smirked, shaking his head. "Maybe not." Another pause. Then, as if she knew that whatever she said next had to be carefully placed, she asked, "What happened to Finn's mother?" Silas's grip tightened slightly on the railing. It wasn't that he didn't want to talk about it. It was just that talking about it never changed anything. She passed away, he said finally. A car accident. Finn was barely 3. Marigold's expression softened, understanding without pity. I'm sorry. Silas nodded, his throat tight. You've done a good job with him, she added. He's a great kid. A small, genuine smile touched Silas's lips. Yeah, he is. They stood there for a long moment, the sounds of the night wrapping around them, something unspoken passing between them. Finally, Marigold looked at him with an almost imperceptible shift in her expression. Something quiet, something searching. Sometimes, she said softly, things don't go the way we planned, but that doesn't mean they can't still be good. Silas met her gaze, and for the first time in a long time, he considered the possibility that she might be right. The past would always be there, a shadow stretching behind them. But maybe, just maybe, there was something ahead worth stepping toward, and maybe, just maybe, Hopewell wasn't just another stop on the road. Maybe it was something more. The sun hung low over the Everhart farm, casting golden light over the fields as Silas Calloway guided his truck down the familiar gravel road. Finn sat beside him in the passenger seat, his small hands gripping Rusty's fur as the dog perched contentedly on his lap. Ever since their dinner at the farmhouse, something had shifted. It wasn't anything overt. Marigold was still the reserved, quietly determined woman she had been when they met. But there was a warmth now, subtle but present, like the first hint of spring after a long winter. Silas had spent the past few days working on the barn, making progress, settling into the steady rhythm of physical labor. It had been years since he'd felt the satisfaction of seeing something broken slowly return to strength beneath his hands. And today, Marigold had invited him and Finn to stay for the afternoon, to share a meal, yes, but also to plant something. "Would you ever plant anything before, kid?" Silas asked as he slowed the truck near the barn. Finn shook his head. "Nope, but Miss Marigold says it's easy. You just dig, put the seed in, and cover it up." Silas chuckled. "That's the gist of it. But it takes time, patience. You don't see results right away." Finn tilted his head. "Like fixing the barn?" Silas glanced at him, something about the boy's simple observation settling deep in his chest. "Yeah, like fixing the barn." Marigold was already waiting for them near the garden behind the farmhouse, a set of gloves tucked under one arm and a small wooden crate filled with seed packets beside her. She looked every bit the part of someone who had worked the land her whole life, her hair pulled back into a loose braid, dirt already streaking the knees of her jeans. "I hope you two are ready to get your hands dirty," she greeted, handing Finn a small trowel. Finn grinned. "I'm totally ready," Silas smirked. "We'll see about that." Marigold gestured to a row of freshly turned soil. "We're planting wildflowers. This patch has been empty too long." She knelt beside Finn, showing him how to make small indentations in the soil before carefully placing the seeds inside. Silas watched as his son followed her lead, his usual boundless energy momentarily tempered by quiet focus. "It's kind of like magic," Finn mused as he pressed dirt over the seeds. "You can't see them, but they're growing," Marigold smiled. "That's the best part. You have to believe in what you can't see yet." Silas crouched down beside them, rolling up his sleeves. "I take it you've done this since you were a kid?" Marigold nodded, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "My mother loved gardening. She said it was like planting hope." Silas glanced at her, catching the fleeting shadow that crossed her features. He knew that kind of shadow, the kind that lingered even after years had passed. "She passed?" he asked softly. Marigold nodded. "When I was 17. There was no elaboration, no unnecessary details, just the quiet weight of loss." Silas didn't offer platitudes. He simply nodded, understanding all too well the way grief shaped a person, the way it dug its roots deep. For a while, they worked in silence. The kind that wasn't awkward or strained, but easy.